The chandelier sparkled like glass stars above a sea of navy blue tuxedos, but no one noticed the lights. All eyes were on the staircase, and the boy they never expected to see up there. "Hey," someone snickered, holding back a laugh. "Let's invite the gay kid from the kitchen. Bet he doesn't even know how to move a pawn." A burst of cruel laughter echoed off the marble walls of the common room. This wasn't just any school. It was St. Alden's, a century-old all-boys prep academy tucked in the hills of Connecticut, where wealth whispered through every hallway and legacy hung heavier than truth. Noah Rivera stood by the far wall, holding an empty tray, eyes fixed on the chessboard in the center of the room. He wore a worn white shirt, sleeves rolled just above the elbow, and a small rainbow pin on the collar subtle, but loud enough in a place like this. He wasn't supposed to be in that room. He was only there because his mother, Carmen Rivera, worked as the school's head cook. And because the seniors, sons of senators, CEOs, and investors needed someone to pour the drinks and serve the cake for their Ivy League celebration. They called it a party, but it felt more like a performance of privilege, the kind that wasn't complete without someone to humiliate. A boy named Parker raised his glass of champagne and pointed toward Noah. "Ethan," he said with a smirk, "your last match before Yale. How about one final game with him?" Gasps circled the room like wildfire. Ethan Chase, captain of the chess team, finalist at the state championship, top 10 nationwide, turned to look at Noah like he'd just been asked to wrestle a janitor. But then he smirked. "Sure, why not?" They cleared the drinks off the mahogany table and Parker whistled. "Come on, kitchen boy. Let's see what kind of entertainment you can give us before dessert." Noah said nothing. He walked forward with the same quiet grace he always carried through the cafeteria. He sat, placed his palms gently on the table, and looked up at Ethan. There was no fear in his eyes, only stillness. Somewhere in the back of the room, a freshman whispered, "That's Carmen's son, right?" "The gay one," another voice replied. "Yeah, the one who always eats alone." And that was the only name they gave him, the gay maid's son. Not Noah, not Rivera, not the kid who earned a scholarship on academic merit and worked part-time in the kitchen to help his single mother with rent. He wasn't part of their world. Not really. Just a face from the basement, tolerated but never welcomed. Yet here he was, sitting across from Ethan Chase, center of the room, center of the story. The room quieted. The pieces were placed. The game was about to begin. Noah adjusted the pin on his shirt and smiled. He wasn't smiling because he felt safe or welcome. He was smiling because they had no idea who they were about to play. If this story moved you or made you pause even for a moment, subscribe to Heart Story. There's more to every person than what the world sees. Let's uncover those stories together. Noah moved the first pawn forward. The click of wood on wood echoed louder than the whispers around him. He didn't look up. Not when Parker muttered something under his breath. Not when Ethan smiled sideways, too busy tossing comments toward the girl seated on his armrest. Not when someone called out, "He's probably trying to remember which one's the bishop." Noah kept his eyes on the board. He knew that room. The cold silence, the velvet curtains, the smell of cigars and polished shoes. He had mopped that floor after parties, served those drinks, cleaned up their jokes. But the chessboard was his now. Not because he asked for it, because they had invited him to be their joke and he accepted. What they didn't know was that Noah learned chess in the quietest corners of the school, long after curfew, when the library lights were off and the world above forgot he existed. He used to sneak into the back reading room, where the shelves gathered more dust than readers. That's where he met Mr. Frank Whitmore. Frank was in his 70s, a former librarian, now part-time volunteer, sorting archives no one cared about. He walked with a limp and wore a maroon cardigan with holes in the sleeves. He always brought a thermos of peppermint tea and one battered chessboard. "Want to learn something nobody can take from you?" he asked Noah one night. Noah didn't answer then, but he sat down, and every evening after that, for 2 years, they played in silence, between rows of forgotten books and stories that hadn't been touched in decades. Frank never asked why Noah was always there so late, never asked why a scholarship student preferred chess over sleep. But once he looked up from the board and said softly, "They'll call you names, son. But remember, even grandmasters lose sometimes. The key is showing up again." Noah remembered. He remembered too. The day he got kicked out of the school's chess club. Not officially, Wayne. They never said, "Well, you're banned." They just stopped inviting him, stopped letting him join team meetings, said his presence made some parents uncomfortable. One boy whispered it bluntly, "We just don't want your vibe around." He walked home that day through snow with no gloves. That night, his mother left a cup of tea on his desk with a small wrapped box. Inside was a rainbow pin. "For when you forget who you are," she had said. He wore it every day since. Even under the school blazer they made him wear while cleaning the kitchen. Even when someone told him he'd be safer if he kept it discreet. Noah didn't fight back. He watched. He listened. He studied. Every YouTube video he could find. Every book Frank lent him. He played against himself. Studied masters who looked nothing like him. Who didn't have to explain who they were before moving their first pawn. He learned patience. He learned patterns. But most of all, he learned to read the room without losing himself inside it. Back in the present, Ethan moved his knight too quickly, trying to look confident. He didn't notice that Noah had set a trap 3 moves ago. The laughter in the room softened. A few boys leaned forward. Noah tilted his head slightly, not in arrogance, in quiet understanding. He didn't belong in that room, but the board didn't care where he came from. Chess didn't care who he loved, and that was the only permission he needed. The queen glided forward. Smooth as breath, the air in the room thickened. Noah didn't look around, but he could feel it. The stillness, the shift, the silence that no longer came from boredom, but disbelief. A few minutes earlier, the room had been roaring, jokes flying like confetti. Someone had even played music on their phone. But now, only the soft clack of chess pieces could be heard. Noah had sacrificed his rook 3 moves ago. To them, it looked like a mistake. Even Ethan had raised an eyebrow, smirked, and whispered, "Bold." But the smirk had disappeared 5 seconds later. When he realized what Noah had built beneath the surface, it wasn't just a move, it was a net. And now Ethan was caught. Noah's fingers moved like ink over paper, silent, fluid, certain. He didn't play for drama. He played to breathe. He had always been told to be smaller, at home, at school, in the locker room, in the way he walked, in the pitch of his voice. They said his body was too soft, his tone too gentle, his smile too lingering. But here, none of that mattered. Not to the pawns, not to the bishops, not to the squares etched on the table between him and Ethan. Someone in the back of the room shifted on the couch. Another leaned forward, chin resting in their palm. It was Parker who broke the whisper-thin tension. "I thought chess was for men," he muttered. A second voice answered quietly, "Maybe he's the only man here." It wasn't meant to be heard out loud, but it was, and it landed like a match dropped in dry grass. Noah didn't react. Not even to the compliment. He stayed calm, reading Ethan's eyes more than his hands, waiting, watching. Ethan began to fidget. He tapped the side of his glass. He leaned back too far. He wiped his palms on his pants. He moved a knight out of panic. Noah countered with a pawn, not because it was powerful, but because it opened the trap. The next 2 moves would be inevitable. The game, at its core, wasn't about domination. It was about timing, control, courage. Noah leaned forward, his voice low, measured, but not afraid. "I don't need you to accept that I'm gay," he said, barely louder than a whisper. "I just need you to understand. I've never needed permission to exist." Ethan's face flushed. He looked around the room, searching for someone to laugh, to support, to reset the power, but no one moved. No one smiled. They were watching Noah now, not because they were told to, not because he was spectacle, because he was commanding. This wasn't the moment they had prepared for. It wasn't the humiliation they'd planned. It was the unraveling of their assumptions. Quiet, strategic, irreversible, and Noah, son of the school cook, student from the basement, gay boy with a rainbow pin on his chest, was leading every step. The night fell. Ethan blinked hard. His fingers hovered over the board, uncertain. It wasn't supposed to go this way. He'd always won before. He was supposed to win now. That was how it worked. Boys like him didn't lose, especially not to boys like Noah. But every path forward was closing, and the room knew it. Noah hadn't said a word since that quiet declaration. He didn't need to. The game was speaking for him now, louder than any defense, clearer than any protest. Ethan moved too fast again. A mistake. He pushed his bishop into the open, hoping to distract, hoping to reset. But Noah was already there. He brought his queen into position. Ethan's king was exposed on all sides. There were no pawns left to shield him, no clever escapes, no tricks, just empty space and inevitability. Then, with a calm hand and a breath that held the weight of everything he'd carried, Noah placed his final piece. Checkmate. Not dramatic, not loud, just final. For a long moment, no one moved. Then, quietly, a voice broke through. It was Mr. Whitmore, the retired librarian, standing near the edge of the crowd. He had come to drop off a book donation. He hadn't expected to witness this. He stepped forward slowly, his voice steady, full of something that sounded like awe. That's the way someone plays when they have been taught with heart. And as if the room had been holding its breath, something shifted. A girl in a silver dress stood up and clapped. Once, then again, another followed, then another. And suddenly, the room erupted. Not in laughter, not in mockery, but in applause. They weren't clapping for the game. They were clapping for the grace, for the endurance, for the boy who had walked into the lion's den and turned it into a stage. Noah didn't bow. He didn't grin. He didn't cry. He simply reached up, adjusted the rainbow pin on his shirt, and stood. Then, finally, he spoke. "I didn't win because I'm gay," he said. His voice was quiet, but it carried, "I won because I didn't quit after they erased me from the chess club, because I didn't break the night I was shoved into the lockers, because I didn't give up when people told me to tone it down, or sit it out, or disappear." He paused. "I won because I learned to love myself when no one else did." The clapping grew louder, this time from the same boys who once mocked him. Even Parker stood frozen, not knowing whether to clap or retreat. Ethan slumped in his seat, defeated but too stunned to speak. Noah stepped back from the board, not with arrogance, but with pride. And in that moment, in a room built to remind him of his place, he redefined it. He wasn't the joke. He wasn't the servant. He wasn't the story they had written for him. He was Noah Rivera. And for the first time, everyone knew it. The video started as a blurry clip from someone's phone. It showed a chessboard, two boys sitting opposite each other, one in a tailored navy suit, one in a second-hand shirt with a spool rainbow pin on the collar. A hand moved, then stillness, then quiet clapping. By the next morning, it was everywhere. In school group chats, on Reddit, then Twitter, then TikTok. The hashtag under the post, #Checkmate with pride. Some reposted it for the gameplay, some for the speech, but most shared it for the feeling. That strange, beautiful ache of seeing someone rise, not with fists, not with fury, but with dignity, with poise, with quiet power. Noah didn't react much to the attention. He had seen how fast the world forgets once the applause fades. But something was different this time. A week later, a formal envelope arrived at the kitchen of St. Alden's. It wasn't addressed to Miss Rivera's son or scholarship student. It was addressed to Noah Rivera. Inside, a letter from Brown University offering him a merit and impact scholarship, citing academic excellence and transformative leadership in student culture. Carmen held the letter for 10 minutes before saying a word. She just pressed her hand to her mouth, the same way she had the day they moved into the tiny apartment behind the school kitchen, not knowing how they'd make it to spring. Later that evening, the school's chess club emailed Noah. They wanted to invite him back, not just as a member, but as team captain. With a public statement of apologies signed by faculty and board members, Noah declined, not out of anger, but because he had already started something new. He called it Queer Mind Chess Club, a student-run group that met weekly in the school library, open to anyone who had ever been told they didn't belong. They played chess, yes, but more than that, they talked about being seen, about fear, about truth. The first meeting had 4 students. The next had 11. By the third week, even a few teachers joined, but the letter that meant most came in handwriting, folded and slipped into the bottom shelf of the library's back room. It was from Mr. Whitmore. He hadn't been back since that night. The note read, "Noah, I never told anyone I was gay. Not my parents, not my students, not even myself, fully. I thought I'd leave this world unknown, unnamed, unclaimed. But you made me proud to be seen. Thank you for showing me that even after all these years, it's not too late to stand." Noah placed the letter in a small wooden box beside his old chess pieces, not as a trophy, but as a reminder that sometimes the win isn't the checkmate. It's what happens after the pieces are cleared. 1 month later, he walked into a city hall auditorium wearing a crisp gray vest and that same rainbow pin. On stage, he received the Inspirational Youth of the Year award. The audience rose to their feet. And in the front row, Carmen stood too, hands trembling, eyes full, whispering to herself, "That's my boy." This time, the applause didn't start in mockery. It didn't begin with pity. It began with awe, and it never stopped. Have you ever felt like someone tried to write your story for you without asking who you are? Tell us in the comments. Your voice matters. Subscribe to Heart Story for more stories of quiet bravery, fierce truth, and the kind of pride no one can take away.